Let's do it.
So it does take like maybe 60 seconds for people to get a notification and stuff like that. But how's your day been so far?
Really good. Enjoying the excellent sunny days of Estonia.
Do you know I've been to Estonia twice, and actually the first year it wasn't too bad. I think it was like 2 years ago I went, but I went last year and it was just like raining nonstop. It was the one place that I could say that it's worse weather than the UK.
Thank you so much for a very good compliment. When did you go? What time of the year?
I think it was around. It must have been like June, July.
So that's the best time. Like that's the peak. Like my favorite time in Estonia, and I genuinely mean, like, if anyone wants to visit, it's like middle of July, second, third week. It's just excellent. It's the hottest that it is. You have like very, very long days and very short nights. You have like amazing parties, beautiful nature, everything's really awesome. Or then do the opposite, like basically come like middle of January or like end of December, so you can see everything covered in snow and all of that. The
Yeah.
rest of the time, it's a different story.
I don't know how true this is, but I read somewhere, or it might have been a video, that Estonia has the longest dark days. Like it's like 22 hours or something in the dark. And I don't think it's the entire country, but it's like one specific area in Estonia.
I don't know, maybe it's more like Alaska or like places like that.
Yeah, maybe.
Uh, but here we have like, I don't know, 7 hours of daylight, kind of, but it doesn't really count because there's just gray clouds all the time. You never see the sun. So, I mean, it's
Yeah,
kind of
that's
like
not great.
22 hours. Yeah, yeah.
Right, so we have got people in now. We've got a few guys in. Jonansson. I'm gonna assume that's a Swedish person. I could be wrong in saying that. But for anyone that doesn't know who you are, Pavel, obviously you've started out the YouTube. Who are you? What do you do? What are you known for?
My name is Pavel Klimakov. I come from Estonia. I focus on semantic SEO primarily, let's say, very thorough scientific research when it comes to research papers, patents, things like that. I primarily practice Korai's framework and his teachings. And these are the main things that I'm focusing on.
Yeah. So obviously SEO. How long have you been doing SEO for? Out of curiosity.
I think now about 8 years,
8 years. And
7, 8 years, I believe. Yeah.
first question is SEO dead?
Nah, nah, and it's like a funniest question ever. Even sometimes, especially when you realize, let's say, your own like I'm talking for myself. When I realize my own blind spots, and I realize like how simple things are in a way, or how different they can be, it's almost ridiculously like funny how people say it's dead when there are like very naive and primitive, let's say, tricks or things that are working. So yeah, it's just gotta look. If you think it's dead, just gotta look a little bit to the side or towards something else.
Yeah, I feel like SEO has definitely changed over the years. I personally don't think it's dead, but like with the rise of like people learning more about semantic SEO, people learning more about sentence structures and stuff, I feel like there has to be like almost a pivot because I remember the days of like when I got into SEO, and I always feel old when I say that, but it's only been like 5 or 6 years I've been doing SEO. It was all to do with like keyword density and getting as many citations or as many links. Now it's almost to do with like how good your quality of your content is.
Yeah, I want to mention maybe like a one, like, I guess, Easter egg or a one thing that I have never mentioned before. This YouTube channel that I started to do now, it's actually a continuation. It's not a brand new channel.
Mm-hmm.
I actually started this channel maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, and at the time, I started to talk about my things, which, and these videos are hidden and they're still there. It's like now looking at it is like hardcore cringe because it is on-site, off-site, put keywords, send links, and that was basically the peak of the knowledge at the time. Um, but let's say to kind of like defend myself in this case, it was working at the time. It's just that it was a little bit like a shaky period exactly when I started the channel, and it's really funny to look at those things now. And if you say like it's changed, it's like really incomparable in terms of the depth and the amount of like awareness that you need to
Mm-hmm.
like really do things efficiently.
Here's an interesting question because I've like we both basically agree SEO has definitely changed from day one when we started doing it. Do you think if you applied the semantic SEO stuff, the content structure stuff, all of that 6 years ago, do you think you would have ranked?
I don't know. Um, I can say definitely that. Well, I guess let me share another story or another like little
Yeah.
Easter egg. So you said about 6 years ago, right? So it is a perfect example. Right now is 2025. In about um, 2019 summer, I was in LA and I was going through some of the meetings. In one of these meetings, I met a person who was very like familiar with SEO. Is as he said, he's been doing it for about like 20 years or something like that, and it was very like hard a little bit to connect with him or communicate with him because at the time I was just basically building PBNs. You put keywords in the title, send PBNs, and it's done. And it's very scalable and it's very easy. So that's really the whole like, you know, name of the game at the time.
Hmm.
Also, I can say it's ridiculous because around this time period, Google has released their kind of like official guideline for how to do SEO, and it's like 80 or 90 pages or something like that, and it's all about like technicalities and like building out different like HTML tags and a bunch of other things. And then like literally the last part of the last page, there's like one paragraph that says something like links are kind of helpful, but don't force create them basically. And
Hmm.
this is at the time where you're literally just sending PBNs directly and you're ranking like super fast. So the point is this: this person that I met at one of the meetings, when he heard that I'm doing SEO, he got excited. He started to ask me questions. I couldn't answer most of those questions, or I was like, yeah, that's not important. It's just sort of, I don't focus on those things. And I believe he said this. I don't recall it very precisely, so maybe I'm wrong about this thing, but he literally, I believe he said something like 2 hours drive away from where we are, a person named Bill Slavsky is giving a like he's sharing his research or he's giving a kind of speech, and he's asking me, "Are you planning to go there?" And at the time, I didn't even know who Bill Slavsky was, and I was like, "No, I'm just like focused on my own things. I'm just doing this stuff and sort of like, it doesn't matter basically." But considering that there was a very like hardcore, very like true old school community of people like Bill Slavsky and this person that I met, I do think that you could implement these things. I don't know if it's like to full scale and just rely on them purely, like you can do it now, but to some extent, I believe, yeah, you could do it, and cannot estimate how efficient it was, but let's say now some of the like hardcore working principles, the patents for these things have been filed in like 2017 or 18.
Hmm.
So there's this gap. So I do think the sooner it comes out, if it's already like a part of the algorithm, a part of the evaluating system, I mean, it can be there. If nobody has discovered it, doesn't mean that it's not actually efficient. So yeah, for
Yeah.
that reason, I do think there is a high chance that it could have been efficient way back then.
Yeah, definitely. I, I almost think that as SEOs, we almost do like the 80-20. So, like, yes, there's 6 million different patents and there's all of these different rules, there's all of these different laws. But as SEOs, I almost think we abuse, or we try, maybe not abuse, but we try to game what we already know that works. So, for example, going back to your scenario, PBNs, they I mean, they still do work, but 10 years ago they worked amazingly well. So why would you spend 3 hours on doing a content brief and doing a topical map when you could just smash, I don't know, 20, 30 more backlinks to your website and you were just going to rank higher?
Yeah, it's true. I can mention one person from Estonia, Martin Saar. Uh, I recall we had a few conversations with him, and essentially he says like, why try to do everything perfectly? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why have a perfect content, perfect this, perfect that? What's the point? And it's true to some extent, because let's say if you have real advantage in how you do branding or how you do linking or how you do PR or whatever, that's your like core strength, and that's one of the verticals. So if you have really like extra competitive advantage that other people do not have, maybe it's not worth for you to obsess about patents and how to write everything perfectly, or how to do your linking, or try to get a knowledge base for your own like, let's say, projects that you run in combination. So it's a bit more like, what are your strengths and how do you utilize them? And the point here is that if people are like doing like GSA spam, like T2 T3 links, well, probably it's not working so well. So it's a good time to maybe switch to something else.
Yeah.
And again, if you switch to another vertical, you still have a kind of like, what's your primary strength? The point is that with everything, this sort of like limit or a kind of ceiling is like almost infinite. And I can see it very clearly, like, let's say, with on a level of, again, PR, branding, or things like proper semantic content networks, or even just dealing with the content itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because the environment changes, technologies change, humans' behavior changes, algorithms change, and it's quite hard to actually accumulate some kind of real leverage or real advantage. So it's all about, let's say, this 80-20, considering the actual strengths, or let's say what is scalable for you, or where you have resources and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got a couple questions. We'll answer some questions. Then I believe you've got a presentation. We'll also go through that, and then if there's any other questions, we'll do them at the end as well. So, question from Lily: how do you evaluate whether a site has a strong topical depth in a niche?
Sure. So one of the things is, the best way to evaluate anything is to actually do it manually. And typically to do that, you need to have a kind of like clear understanding of what is actually valuable. So to give, let's say, a analogy or a more clear example, let's say we can look at the site and we can see they cover lots of different topics. If we look at the pages, we can look at the, let's say, heading structures and see that this kind of looks quite in depth. They seem to be covering different angles, different perspectives, etc. But then, what if all of this is, let's say, AI generated, or kind of like scraped and then modified with AI, and then through these ways or through these matters, the content is actually published. So then it has an imitation of that depth, but doesn't have the actual, let's say, performance, or the actual, let's say, legitimate coverage. Um, so in a way, it is good to look at the actual, let's say, performance, which is why it's good to use some kind of, let's say, tools that give you estimations for the, let's say, behavior or performance of these articles or pages. But in general, that is also not really like truly fully reliable. So then in this scenario, ideally you want to do a kind of, again, 80-20, where you mostly rely on your own skill set and understanding and evaluation, and then partially look at the tools. A few, let's say, key moments here is that some of the tools do not really estimate the let's say, date or the duration of the publication. Because it's a completely fresh article, it might be underperforming just yet because it hasn't been evaluated thoroughly. Or maybe it's a really old one and it's actually outdated, so it's slowly, let's say, decaying. That's a really important factor to try to estimate. So this kind of, let's say, freshness or the time of publication is an important matter. Um, Another one is, let's say, it's a little bit not so much about the topical depth in itself, but it's more kind of synergy or alignment of all of these articles. If you have a kind of content plan or a content network from one of your competitors, where you see that things are obviously spread out, they're just jumping from topic to topic. Let's say they're dealing with a kind of running shoes and you realize there is like two articles related to Adidas, and then there is a landing page or a sales page for that. Then there is like three articles related to, let's say, running shoes for kids. A few of them, let's say, go into for kids, let's say, that are girls, for kids that are boys. So it's sort of all over the place and it doesn't sort of fulfill all of these desires. And by these desires, what I mean is if you try to estimate, let's say, different indexes that Google has for any specific query or query network, you can estimate the actual size. So if there are, roughly speaking, 20 topics and your competitor covers 4 or 5 of them, or they have 4 or 5 articles, that's not really like a full proper coverage. So I know it's a bit, let's say, longer answer, but this is the main principle behind it.
Yeah.
I can add like one tiny nuance is that you have essentially relations and connections from entities to entities or objects to objects. That's one way to look at the coverage. Another one is to take one entity at the center, try to get all of the indices for that, and then try to understand how much of those indices are being covered. So that's like a combination of both. And as you understand, by looking at the entities, that's really simple. You can just throw it, let's say, into like you can get the sitemap, throw it to ChatGPT and say sort of what's missing here. That's a quick, simple way. But this is very, very far from seeing the actual real coverage. So again, this is like small shortcuts through the tools, through AI, other things, but the real like precise vision, if you need that, let's say, business intel to make the decision to compete there or not, it comes from, let's say, expertise in manual work, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, one example that I'm constantly using now on videos and stuff is like the SEMrush website, because this is their article on how to do keyword research, right? But they've also tried to like predict questions that people might have while reading this article. So, for example, you read like the first paragraph and they're talking about search engine optimization, and then they internally link to their search engine optimization or what is SEO page. Then you scroll further down the website. Then here they've got their organic research tool, which is obviously like a service that they offer. So they're also internally linking to like pages that is selling their tool as well, which is kind of similar to what you were saying before with the kids or Adidas shoes and stuff, where it internally links to like an actual product or a service that they actually offer. And then further down, they're talking about like featured snippets. Now, if you were an absolute novice, you hadn't done SEO at all, you would read through this article, and if you were to click through to all their internal links, you would probably, I would like to think you would have like a good understanding of, first of all, what keyword research is and what SEO is, and all the moving parts like featured snippets, what's a SERP, etc. as well. Um, so yeah, our next question is from Fahim. This is a good question actually. How much weightage do you give to topical authority versus off-page SEO backlinks?
So I wouldn't really put them as, let's say, kind of competitors of one against another, but I would really see them as a one supplementary for another. For example, I can see very clear cases where just pure content sites rank with basically zero offsite activity. However, for that to be accomplished, it takes like months and months of work. And I mean like 12 months, 15 months, 18 months. And I mean, it's just extremely slow. This obviously can be sped up if you invite, let's say, certain attention mechanisms or crawlers that will try to evaluate your content quicker or just give you a little bit more weight in terms of prioritization over others. So in general, when I think of, let's say, algorithms, Google, or any ranking systems, it's mostly like ones and zeros. If you have, if there's a kind of parameter and you have zero for that, it's always worse than having one. So if you do not have any links, if you do not have any, let's say, social signals or etc., that's just zeros that are potentially on those metrics when it comes to evaluating your site. And so back to this point of, let's say, offsite or backlinks for content, it is very clear that if you just publish and continue publishing and you never have an external, let's say, additional signal to, or a kind of reason for Google or their crawlers to evaluate your content thoroughly, you're not even getting, let's say, more expensive or more thorough evaluations on your content, let's say, in a like a quick enough pace. You just have to wait. And sometimes this wait, as I said, it can be just months or like over a year or things like that. So it's not worth it to obsess whether it's, let's say, should we do this thing or that thing. It's like union or like a family or like a whole concept.
Yeah.
So that's how I see it.
What's your thoughts on this? Because again, going back to like a few years ago, you used to see a lot of like link builders, and they would do like all these case studies. It's like we've built 15 links to this website, and we've jumped position to position number one for this keyword and that keyword. Right? I'm seeing a lot less of those. That being said, I am seeing a lot bigger jumps or a lot bigger decreases in rankings after core algorithm updates. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I can see that very clearly within the latest research papers that have been coming out directly from Google. They have very serious, let's say, intentions to go way more granular into understanding, let's say, the documents or the, let's say, articles or the content, and also the actual, let's say, users queries, their requests, in combination with, let's say, AI chats or AI modes and etc. This, let's say, pushes them or forces them to just really grasp the essence of what's being requested versus what's being shared. Technically, if we're going to talk about up until, let's say, 2024, which is like exactly a year ago, um, all of these, let's say, semantic elements, they're primarily depending on a technology that's called embeddings. And this is a very far from like, it's a technology that is very far from like something perfect that can like really excellently show you a kind of situation of these two things are exactly related, so therefore they should be presented on the SERP. Many times they're related, but they're not good enough to serve the query. Maybe only one of them is good enough, or maybe actually none of them are good enough. So this is why um, the goal is very clear. They want to understand what's being said much, much more thoroughly. And it does seem that now, because of, let's say, leveraging LLMs through lots of different configurations, there are some promising ways how that can be done. For this reason, if they are confident in this technology, I do think that it will be like more and more about the actual accuracy, like reliability and precision of all of these answers. Which is why, again, I do think, coming back to the previous question, doesn't mean that link building is dead or shouldn't be used, but I think it should be used for a different purpose. It becomes, let's say, at least within some paradigm, at least under certain conditions, a little bit something more like an attention invite or something like that. And this is actually showing some, let's say, quite good details for how proper link building should be done to actually get the benefit out of that, um, which is only interesting. I think it only makes SEO more uh, like more practical and more exciting.
Yeah, if so, I'll give I'll give a percentage, right? Because I know that Corey's done this in the past, and he got a lot of hate from the link builders. I don't care. The link builders can come and kill me for all I care. I'm going to say that link building as a whole has definitely gone down in importance because, again, like I remember the days where people would build like one or two links and then boom, 2 weeks later they would rank, or they would build like one or two PBNs and then boom, they would rank. But equally, I think that now is probably the easiest time to rank without links. The caveat to that is like in the iGaming sector, in the adult sector, in the porn sector, those sectors you probably do need links for. And if you sell links and you don't like what I say, then that's the truth. um,
Yeah, look, there is. It definitely depends on, let's say, the market, the kind of project it is. Because if you are trying to rank for something like YouTube video downloader or something like
mhm,
that, of course, like there is a semantic network that you can cover that can help you supplement your rankings and let's say, uh, give you some other types of benefits there. But uh, if you have like hardcore EMDs that are actually overly linked, it will be harder to go there and compete without any links at all. And then on the, let's say, in reverse, if you're going to go into some market where it's not an English language, it's something local, and then there is like barely anything that's visible on the SERP,
mhm,
you can rank almost anything as long as you have a few of these proper local links. I'll emphasize, I mean it in a case where there is, it's not an English language, it is something else. It's not highly competitive, and possibly lots of these, let's say, semantic content evaluations are not even fully active there, or are very primitive versions of that active. Because if you have, let's say, 1,000 people searching for some kind of query in an unknown language, well, what's the point of trying to process and check everything so thoroughly there? So it's like, it's very clear that, let's say, main, like worldwide or international Google that focuses on English language is very different in terms of its algorithm for, let's say, some other countries. So there's that difference as well.
yeah, definitely. We then have a question here. How do you make sure you're missing any important topics in a semantic content network or not?
So this is one of the things, you can really try to focus on what's called, let's say, entity-oriented search, or in other words, let's say if you can take anything as a starting point, which means you can take a query, you can take a document, you can take your competitor, really anything that you want. Most likely the easiest one is if you want to rank for, let's say, best singing classes. You will take that as your starting central point. From here, you try to spot the main entity. If you don't know what this is, you can actually use, let's say, ChatGPT for help. Central point here will be singing classes, which you can then split further down into singing and classes. You can search for singing classes, or let's say best singing classes. And from there, as you evaluate the SERPs, you can see that there would be things that would start to appear, like there are different types of singing that exist, and therefore different types of singing classes also exist. Maybe there could be different techniques or methodologies or teachers, or different, let's say, imitations of very famous singers. All of these different entities, they start to appear on the SERP, and Google is directly telling you these are relevant because these are appearing through the results. And they're also directly relevant to the query that you wanted to cover. So in this specific case, you can create a kind of, let's say, manual step-by-step, like walking or sequencing Once you search for one object, new objects appear.
Mm.
You search for all of those, you spot what else appears. And this makes a kind of like step by step checking all of the SERPs. This sort of gives you a kind of conceptual representation of what are these different topics that you should be covering. And it can be done in, let's say, quite fast way if you're using some kind of like assistance methods. Again, you can use AI for these things. The most important part is that you just realize that there's additional objects that become involved that are related when it comes to, like, say, explaining or understanding this specific topic.
Yeah, I mean, even just like looking at this myself, and I suppose it is a little bit hard to teach this to someone. I think it just comes with like just doing it and experiencing it more. But like just looking at this, I would say like best singing classes or best vocal classes would be like a topic. Then you might have best singing classes for beginners. Then there's like all of the like the variances as well. So like singing classes for children could be another one. Singing classes for adults could be another one. Again, this like I suppose that like this is something that you would probably practice, right? This isn't something that you just like grasp overnight.
Yeah, it takes practice, definitely. And as I said, you can use AI to just give you some kind of assistance on this level. To give
Mhm.
a more practical advice, I can just say that it's ideal for you to focus on nouns specifically. And there is a kind of relationship of these nouns or objects to each other. Uh, Usually, you would be looking for something that represents a hierarchy. So once you spot a single object, you realize that there is either like an upper grouping or a lower grouping of these nouns presented within the search. You can also look for example, at the, let's say, related searches. There are additional, let's say, um, search boxes appearing right at the top that sometimes give you different, let's say, angles or elements. And that's the kind of the, let's say, the way to look at it in reverse is that if you were to work with an actual expert on singing and you were to go and ask them, we will create a website about singing, what kind of things we should talk about on our website? Well, he'll immediately start to tell you, well, there are different tonalities, different vocals, different types of singing, different, let's say, methodologies, a kind of synergy with maybe some elements or beat and how to be in sync with the beat, etc. So you have to consult someone. If you have an expert, you can consult them. If you do not have them, you can consult the SERPs themselves. If you are really lost in all of this, you can try to combine SERPs in combination with AI. And the main point is focus on the nouns or the objects, or in a scientific proper term, these are called entities.
Yeah, I mean, like just going back to what you were saying before, like even loading up a couple of your competitors, um, you'll start to see that there's like different types. So like opera singing, pop singing, rock, online courses. That could be another form of like an entity or like a variation or modifier as well. Um,
Yeah, you can look through competitor sites. The point is there is no like special secret source where you can find everything. It's that you really have to understand the niche. And how do you understand the niche if you don't know the niche? Well, one of the ways is like consult someone, consult AI or an expert, or go through the SERPs and just spot all of these things. And you can see, like, let's say there is some kind of term that appears, let's say violin or something like that. You don't know what it is. Just search what is violin, and then like how is violin like connected to singing,
mhm.
and you just slowly connect the dots. It's like you learn about the niche, you understand what are different objects that are always referenced or interconnected, and that's how you become uh, like let's say that's how you grasp the niche to the point where you're actually ready to process all of these topics.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so what we'll do is we've got like a few more questions. Do you want to do your presentation now, and then we can go back to some of these questions later, in maybe like 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes?
Sure, let's do it. um,
Perfect.
let's share my screen.
I will add it to the view so everyone can see it.
You should be able to see my screen now, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
All right,
Ready.
awesome. So I wanted to show a little bit of an, let's say, extension for one of the speeches that I have done already. This Semantic SEO simplified speech, you can find the recording for this on YouTube. I've processed it quite in depth. The point is that a few months later after that presentation, I created a slightly, let's say, extended version or an extended edition because I wanted to introduce a few additional points that I couldn't include due to the, let's say, duration. So I would like to show a few of them over here. And also we'll try to connect things to a more, let's say, recent updates and a few, let's say, other additional things that are going on. So very quickly, we'll go through a few of these main concepts, like, let's say, what is semantic SEO and why it works. The rest of the stuff we'll skip as it is not critically important for this specific part. So when it comes to semantics or semantic SEO, if you're going to look at this specific part over here, you realize this is a kind of, let's say, passage of text. We're here in a slightly darker color. This would represent a kind of heading. Typically headings, they, let's say, cut the article into sections. So this is just a one single section over here. And so when it comes to, let's say, working with content on a much deeper level, there are a few elements that become highly important, or let's say they become a kind of like highly sensitive zones where search engine, let's say, might be paying extra attention. One of these things is actually the first sentence that is being followed by your heading. Technically, as I mentioned, if a heading would cut the article into chunks or into different parts, then the way you start your first sentence or you start this specific section, it actually carries a lot more meaning and a lot more importance. Then also there are things like if you have multiple paragraphs of text, it's very important sort of how do you balance them out, or how do you, let's say, differentiate one of these paragraphs from another. So in a one scenario, you can think of it like over here. We have a paragraph, and then, we have a heading, and then we have the first paragraph over here. We have a clear start, and let's say a clear end. Everything that is in between would be filled with triples, which I believe most of you would be aware of what it is by now. If not, I'll share a few examples of that slightly in the future, like in a couple of minutes. And so over here comes a kind of, let's say, sort of self-explanatory, very clear logic or structure. Again, the heading, the first paragraph of text that has a kind of a clear context, angle, or a purpose for how you're providing that answer. And then within this section, all of these blue elements, they would represent statements or sentences, or let's say triples, that are highly supplementing or supporting each other, and specifically supporting this, let's say, narrative or perspective that you're trying to present over here. And then let's say if you need to add another context or angle, that will happen in the next paragraph over here. This is a really important part now, because in certain scenarios, you'll have to create a kind of, let's say, combination of answers that touch on different points or perspectives or different contexts. The way you group them and organize is primarily driven by the query that you're trying to process, or let's say the answers that you're trying to provide for the specific question that you've designed based on, let's say, the set of queries. An important element over here, I wanted to share this specific video, which comes from this person over here, and around this mark, she was mentioning and by the way, just to make it clear, this is one of the recent videos where she was being interviewed, and she mentions something that if you bring your own, let's say, perspective or your own experience, this is something that they see as more valuable, or something that they would try to look for and identify within the writing of your contents. So this is, let's say, a kind of logic or a structure that you can utilize to actually combine providing your own experience, which can be a little bit, let's say, more unorganized or more clunky kind of in a way, and differentiate that directly from the consensus or the actual factual information that you are presenting. Same thing happens with, let's say, perspectives or different types of angles that you can present within the articles. This keeps everything very clean, very sort of obvious for the crawlers, and let's say things like cost of processing these types of elements becomes much simpler. Another important part, so you apply this kind of principle across the entire article, across all of the sections and all of the paragraphs. Then you build a kind of hierarchy, which I believe everybody is, let's say, highly familiar with. But just to make it extra clear, a kind of H3 over here, it can just give more emphasis or more details for the specific topic or subtopic that you chose to process or explain. If you realize that in your query network that you're working with, there's a ton of requests, and usually they start to deepen, or they request for more specificity, like we were mentioning before. If we're dealing with, let's say, not running shoes, but how to run faster, and then you would say for men that are like over 50. So that becomes a much different set of instructions, potentially, if you just ask a general question to how to run faster. If there is an actual differentiation in the answer for different, let's say, age groups, then this is where you can start to create these types of additional areas to specify these types of contexts. And so this type of hierarchy applied throughout the article. Over here, in the final version, you have different types of two different zones or two different main elements, which is the macro context and micro context. An important piece here is that so far, everything that I've presented, it was primarily related to like words, phrases, sentences, but this can be seen as the, let's say, overall, like a universal or a unified principle. Let's say if this page over here is focusing on that YouTube downloader software that we mentioned before, then this part will actually have a form that allows you to do the downloading, and it will include all of the different variations for, let's say, downloading it with audio or without audio, in HD format or in like 4K or etc. Because there are different needs and different requests, it's important that you address all of them in this macro part. It doesn't matter if it's a written article or let's say if it's a kind of commercial page where you have products or like buy now, checkout elements, or a kind of, let's say, SaaS for, let's say, downloading the videos or converting the files or things like that.
Can I just butt in for 1 second?
Mm-hmm.
With the macro, would you say that, like, for example, if somebody has searched for affordable gaming chairs, right, and that could potentially be like a category page for an e-commerce store, right? The macro content at that point might be like 20 different gaming chairs.
Hmm.
That's what you mean, right? It doesn't necessarily always have to be content, because in some cases, if it's like buy running shoes, that might be a e-commerce category page. Whereas if somebody's searched for buy Adidas Pavel 445 running shoes, that might be a specific actual product. So they would want like an add to cart, a price, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's the main principle. The point over here is that this macro area, it is built specifically for the query network, and the query network always has a kind of main intention or a main idea behind it. So again, if you're looking for like download YouTube videos, it's clear that you don't want to read about how to download those YouTube videos. You can write the best articles in the world on that topic. It's not going to actually give people what they want. They need this kind of throw in the URL, press, let's say, adjust the settings and press download. Like that's the actual need there. And then additional things, let's say, related to, is it legal to download these videos, or can you do some kind of modification or editing while you download them, or something like that, like integrating watermarks, or let's say removing them, or whatever. That's what comes into your supplementary part. And this part is a lot more flexible. And this is where you can start to be more, let's say, creative to interconnect these pages and topics in relation to your own, let's say, main angle or main source context of your site. Or let's say maybe you need to connect this to some other page that you have, whether, let's say, you're comparing different products or services or things like that. So this is one of these main components. So thus far, let's say we have prepared a perfect article over here. Everything, if you remember, everything is processed very thoroughly. Each paragraph and each sentence is exactly aligned with the headings. Headings are formed in a hierarchy. And this is our first completed article. We replicate this process across basically the site. And as we do that, we realize there's a kind of hierarchy across these articles as well. And for, let's say, kind of simplification, if we just, let's say, convert from this into this, you'll realize that there is a kind of, let's say, like anatomically, there is a real, let's say, hierarchy, or I usually call it a kind of ladder. Let's say within the Core Eyes community, and based on his framework, these things are called the root article, the seed article, and then the nodes over here. The point is that this is a kind of main topic, that this is the main page that represents the topic in general, and that will naturally have some kind of sub context, which would be over here, and then come very, very granular, very specific elements over here. So to give you a kind of example, this can be a general running shoes, or let's say like running tutorials or things like that. This can become specifically how to run faster or speed related things. And then everything over here can go into, let's say, how to run faster, let's say uphill, or for marathons, or for sprinting, or etc., etc., etc. Then for marathons, for sprinting, within those articles, looking back at these hierarchies, you can realize there would be questions like, let's say, how to do it if someone had an injury, or if they have certain medical conditions, or if, let's say, I'm not sure exactly what affects the, let's say, the actual speed performance, but it could be things like height of a person, or different, let's say, uh, muscle density, or different types of things like that. So that's the logic when it comes to this kind of hierarchy. And this goes way further. So you can have multiple seeds over here, which are then, each one of them is being processed again deeper. And something like this would look like a more actual, let's say, completed semantic content network. You can think of this as a kind of topical map, or at least a kind of like I mentioned before, like universal representation of a topical map, because you can have sometimes multiple central objects, sometimes there would be very few amount of uh, these nodes over here. Sometimes it could be like a few seeds, sometimes it could be like thousands of these elements and barely anything over here. Again, it's just a conceptual representation for you to grasp the like.
If we were to apply this to like let's say we wanted to rank higher for SEO, right? So am I right in saying that the green one might be like what is SEO, right? And then the orange ones might be like link building, it might be technical SEO, it might be content, right? And then the blue ones for if we then went into like technical SEO, it might be like internal links, how to fix 404s, how to fix double 301 redirects. Is that the kind of the breakdown that you would have?
Yeah,
Right. Okay.
yeah. And so over here, basically we have another. So this is correct. That's the exact, let's say, idea behind this concept or a principle that Korai has, let's say, designed and invented. And so over here, you have two very important elements. Again, you have sort of, let's say, one part of this network, and then there is another part of this network. More precisely, you would have the core part over here, which is something that you're actually monetizing. So this is that you really want to rank for these articles, and this is where you have your landing pages or product pages, category pages, etc. So these are exactly these, let's say, uh, action integrated elements within these pages where people convert. So that's your really main target. Over here, these could be a slightly distant topics that maybe help to explain how all of these works or the pros and cons or etc. So properly, this area over here is called outer section of your topical map. And this part that you monetize is called core section of the topical map. A very important element is that whenever you're building internal links, all of these elements, all of these articles, they start to link towards this direction over here. Obviously, you're pointing your user flow and at the same time crawler flow towards your most important parts over here. And you can realize that sometimes some of these pages could be dedicated. I mean, they could be over here. It could be even this part over here, which could be your main homepage in the case of, let's say, that YouTube downloader website. So that's one of these main components. Now, a few words why it works. In the original presentation, I mentioned Korai as the actual inventor of this whole system. It's really important to mention this because everything that he put together is built on thousands of patents and years of manual work. And he shared all of this work basically for free on a YouTube video, which is always insane to me to, let's say, remember. And which is why I want to mention this to you guys over here as well. And so now, to make things, let's say, a little bit faster and simpler, or maybe not so much simpler, but I would like to show a few patterns to specify, let's say, why these things are important or why things work the way they work. This is one of the, let's say, most fundamental or simpler patterns. Over here, they talk about the server structure. Over here, you can see different clustering systems. Essentially, there are different tiers, as you can see over here. Then there are clusters. Then within clusters, there are also different shards. So it's a very granular, clear kind of like hierarchy or just, let's say, things within other things to simplify the costs for Google to, let's say, operate and process the web. One of the most important things over here is the phrase posting list. These phrase posting lists, they contain certain phrases. What this means is that the phrases that you use within your content, based on these phrases, you will be put in different tiers or different parts within this prioritization hierarchy within Google's operating systems. So the kinds of words that you use within your content are really important for where you're going to be assigned and sort of who you will start to compete with, and let's say the overall success of your uh, website and your content strategy. Another important part comes from this patent over here. They're actually essentially showing you that they will rank the documents based on related phrases that are appearing within the documents itself. And in this blue text over here, you can see that these related phrases will be the ones that are commonly used to discuss or describe a given specific topic. And here's a, let's say, quick example for that. If you mention a kind of phrase for President of the United States, another phrase like White House has to be ingrained into this article for it to be considered that this has actually much more, let's say, meaningful conceptual signals that will allow to put you in a, let's say, higher priority within the server structure, first of all, and then actually affect your overall, let's say, rankings. So I hope this is clear. One important moment that I really wanted to address in combination to all these things. This example that we're showing to you over here, it comes from a patent about phrase-based indexing. This technology is something that I'm like genuinely, let's say, impressed, and I think it's something that is way ahead of its time. I think it was developed somewhere in 2000, if I remember correctly, like 8 or 9 or something like this. This is at the time when Google has no technology and humanity doesn't have any technology to grasp the actual meaning of these things. Yet they're able to actually realize that somehow a phrase of President of the United States meaningfully connects to a phrase White House. The point is, this patent by now is technologically outdated, even though there could be, let's say, certain signs that they might be partially using it. But if you check this one over here, you will realize that is essentially expired, if I remember correctly. And again, the main reason is that there is just a much better technological solutions to try to capture these phrases over here. Nonetheless, the main principle behind it still holds true because there is no other way for them to, let's say, make logical evaluations for what is higher quality or, let's say, lower quality. And let's say, just not to leave you hanging over here, I do believe that at this specific moment, Google does care a lot about the actual, let's say, entity attribute pairs, or essentially triples, which we have also mentioned before, but not in a kind of blind way that you just want to stuff as much of them as you can. It comes in relation to the actual query or the actual, let's say, part of the passage that is being processed. Just to give us, let's say, slight context over here, if you try to process these things programmatically, you realize that, let's say, sending attributes or explaining or expressing attributes of a specific entity is really useful in some cases, but it is basically like a third priority in some other cases. We know that Google cares a ton about these things, which I will show you in one of the next slides. But the point is that they have to capture the, let's say, essence of the meaning through some elements or some words within the content, and you can realize that these could be like a, let's say, statistical phrases like these ones over here, but this is unlikely. But let's say to some extent it can still hold true. But the most probable thing will come to the actual, let's say, triples or a kind of unique statements, which is what we can see exactly over here in one of the next patterns. This is the last one for this list, so I hope you guys are not bored. You can see the name and the number of the patent over here. Essentially, what they're showing to you over here is that they are building a kind of knowledge base or a kind of unified knowledge repository about every single thing that can possibly exist on this planet and even in this universe, which is, let's say, completely insane conceptually to realize that such a machine exists on this planet, but that's what Google has been building for many years. If we're going to look at this specific patent over here, there are a few things that I really wanted to show you. So this is the same picture that we just saw before. One of the important things here is that you have essentially kind of storage for, let's say, object ID, which would be the entity or a reference for the entity. So this can be running shoes, this can be SEO, this can be singing classes, and etc. Then let's say there is an identification for, let's say, different types of tracking, internal maintenance, etc. And over here, you have an attribute. For the attribute, you also have the value. So entity, attribute, value. This is what represents a triple or represents a kind of knowledge base or a kind of unification of the knowledge that can be extracted from your articles or from your documents or from your semantic content networks. If we're going to look at other additional elements over here, you see a slightly more precise example. So you have some kind of entity. We don't know what it is. We just know it's an object that exists. Then its attribute, specifically the name, will be China, which is related to the country. Then you have additional, let's say, expansion for category related country and so on and so forth. Here's another part for, let's say, another object. You have an attribute, and then it shows to you that they can store actual, like, full sentences, let's say, explaining a certain information about the person or a specific object or things like that. Another important element in all of these, here's another, let's say, table or a representation. And important piece over here is that all of these things that we're looking at is exactly the same principle. These are just different methods that they try to protect within this patent. So we didn't know precisely which one they're using, but it doesn't matter because across all of these, you see exact same core principle. There's always a kind of object that is being focused on. That will have an attribute that is assigned to it. And then there is the value, which is the actual representation, or let's say the information related to the attribute. Over here, you can also start to see things like sources, which come from different web documents that have stated that specific fact. So if they understand what's happening over here, they're trying to collect these types of statements from all of the documents across the whole internet and learn about all possible objects that can exist, which then gives them a kind of hyper precise understanding of what people, let's say, repeat, what kind of facts are clearly known and obvious, what things are, let's say, more unknown, or there's lots of different things that this kind of knowledge base allows them to sort of unlock or present lots of different things. If you're going to search for something like most funny movies, or let's say the movies that were filmed in Europe, or things like that. This is where they can just go into this knowledge base. They can get a list of objects that are movies, the attributes which would be filmed in location, and the value would be, let's say, all European countries or cities. And that allows them to see the actual list of all of these objects. And they can do that for literally any kind of thing that exists. They just don't necessarily do it within the SERPs for every single person that is searching. But you can get the idea of these things if you look again for things like, let's say, countries with highest GDP, or let's say books about, let's say, like horror books or detectives or stuff like that.
I suppose this kind of acts like a cache. So it means that every time when someone searches something, they don't need to go out and find that data. They're like, right, okay, we know that these 700 websites has said that Pavel lives in Estonia. We don't need to go and research that. We're just going to go to our memory and we're going to pull that data.
Yep, and they also have, I believe, another patent. So I'm not sure if it was mentioned over here. It's actually in one of these. So there are these things that they call, let's say, janitors, which actually do a kind of cleanup and maintenance of this kind of knowledge base, in the sense that if some facts start to be refreshed or updated, or maybe sources all go offline, and let's say that information is no longer maintained, then they also refresh everything over here. So it's a kind of, let's say, extract and store, but then also refresh and maintain to keep it up to date and relevant. Um, as a quick side note, the craziest thing to me is maybe one of the first times when I was reading one of these patents, and in some of these examples, they actually literally tell you that they can take one movie as a kind of like central focus, and they can store every single line that an actor has said throughout the whole movie. And they can do it for all actors, for all movies, and all of that literally lives on the servers within,
Oh,
let's
wow.
say, like across the web.
So
So
now knowing that, do you think that Google's going to win the AI race?
yeah, definitely. I can show a few additional things related to that, but uh, the thing here is that what you see in the search when you search for, let's say, most, let's say, like funniest movies, or classical movies or whatever, they're pulling it from over here. But the point is that if you, like, technically, if you search for like entrepreneurs that are 20 years old that live in Iceland, they can give you exactly that representation, because they will know, at least according to the content available on the web, who are these people, which is insane, because then you can search for anyone anywhere, and you just have pure, clean, perfect data available showing, like, here are all these things. You can ask, like, how, let's say, what are the molecules of some specific chemical, let's say, element. It can show you all of that in a near instant. When it comes to AI, the craziest part is, I actually wrote about this on my LinkedIn in one of the uh, posts, or like mini articles that I shared. The point is that this right now is not integrated with AI. AI sort of runs in like a wild dog, sort of kind of trying to connect the words to each other, but it doesn't really have a kind of central foundation that it always can come back to and sort of validate or verify its own understanding. But the point is that Google has been building this specific thing that you're looking at over here for like the last 20 years, probably more. So they know a lot of things about, like, in it's hard to understand. It's hard to like accept how much information there is in this specific thing. So technically, if they were to, let's say, realize that this is a new chemical element or a new kind of, let's say, um, let's say a protein model or something like that, that has been discovered, and they realize that this thing is unknown, if they do, let's say, manual research, or they discover the actual elements that are contained within it, that can be added to the knowledge base, and this knowledge base can be then supplemented or used as a real memory of the AI. And this actually becomes a kind of like AGI, or something that is genuinely like hyper accurate and way smarter than anyone that we know that exists on the planet. This is not applied yet, and I do think there is lots of technical problems and lots of other things. But since you asked about AI, I do think this will be one of the kind of ways to actually get to that point where a real, let's say, AI, or what people call AGI, it has to be connected to, something like this. So about winning the race, I don't know any other company that will have a knowledge base that is at this scale, that
Yeah.
like genuinely knows like every micro tiny thing, like the phrases and the words of every single song from all of the singers that ever existed. Like uh, it's, yeah, quite insane. Anyway, so one important thing that I wanted to mention over here, since we mentioned something, let's say, that related to triples or kind of statements that are useful for you to implement within your contents, in order specifically to go through these re-rankings and much more, let's say, positive evaluations for your own content strategies. You can see a kind of representation over here. So it's a slightly, let's say, different way to look at it, but you can see that we're focused on one entity, which is this one over here. Then this entity has an attribute, which is birthday. And for the birthday, this is the actual, let's say, value or the representation of that. The full, let's say, phrase or a sentence that is written over here is the representation of the actual triple. It is the entity, then this is the attribute, which is, let's say, birthday, and then there is the actual value. So you can realize this becomes a fact, a clear statement, like this, what happened, or this is how one thing relates to another one. These kinds of statements are, as I said, they call triples. They can be oriented around attributes, which is in this case, let's say, birthday, but they also can be oriented or focused around different actions, like, let's say, Britney Spears, let's say, donated or traveled or etc. So the action that is being taken is also really important. So it's these different, let's say, key elements, whether it's the another object or the main action that your main entity is taking. Both of these concepts can be equally important when it comes to trying to spot these kinds of phrases, to basically understand the quality of what Google likes to say, or like helpful, this is helpful or this is not quality, or etc. That's kind of on a granular level how they can try to very precisely in an engineered solution, they can evaluate these things quite clearly. And so, yeah, there's a ton more to talk about. Over here, I just want to give a like quick example. If there is some of the people that are watching, if they'd like to study this a bit further, you can check this thing called RDF, which is, I believe, a kind of like protocol for sharing the data. But you can see that it comes back basically to triples or these kinds of statements. If they connect or let's say extract them, then they can start to build all kinds of these visual graphs and representations. And this again all comes back to having a clean data that is represented over here. Once you have this, you can do really like insane amount of things in terms of fact checking, creating all kinds of like ranked lists for like let's say best SEO tools or best like countries to travel through or etc etc. So this lives at the like core part of Google's brain. Understand
Mm.
that this is the we're looking literally at like inside this Google's understanding of what is what. Um, so yeah, that's this main part. If anybody wants to check this paper, you can do that. It's mostly coming from Microsoft, but there are some interesting things that you can find there as well. And yeah, this is the main thing that I wanted to present because I have not explained this in detail thus far uh, anywhere.
Yeah. I think with when it comes to semantic SEO, this could have been like a 7-hour live stream, and we would only just be scratching the surface.
There is a lot, yeah. Especially if you look at, let's say, patterns, then you realize there's so many tiny elements and tiny details in everything. So
Mm.
I'm sorry if it was a little bit long, but I
No,
just
it's
wanted
fine.
to present more.
Have you got 5 more minutes? We'll quick fire through some of the questions, and then we'll let you go.
Sure, let's do it.
So we have got Pratik. How how to find less competitive space on SERP to start and show Google our site quality and get historical data when you're starting a new website in the niche like CRM tool.
Definitely look for, let's say, competitors or articles that are really outdated, that are not maintained. Most likely, understand just quickly this thing. Uh, First come the queries, then people learn about this content. Typically they have more questions, so they have more queries, which means as you write more content, there is more queries that are coming in, which is why it's important to update because there is more demand, there's more requests, there's more interests that are being expressed. So typically, if you have a case where content is outdated, that means they're missing a ton of these things that are being asked and nobody's answering that. That's a very clear soft spot that's very easy to replace all of the, let's say, existing sources. Another one, I will just give maybe a more, let's say, old school, very simple representation. Try to go for a more longer tail terms. That's where you will most likely to find exactly a kind of not refreshed sources, just because there's a higher chance that these longer tail requests are coming specifically from the newer user base, and nobody has really addressed that yet. The only important thing is always work with Google's indices and not like keywords, because keywords or queries, they are grouped, and you need to work with the group, not with just like this little one, because that seemed, let's say, uncompetitive.
Yeah. Going back to what you were saying before about finding older articles, what's your method of finding those old articles?
I built my own Chrome extension that just shows me the publication dates. If I search anything on the SERPs, it just shows like here's the approximate, like the oldest, the newest, and the average, basically.
Right. Okay.
And then I can see approximately like, okay, these are like this SERP is really old, or this SERP is really new. But this also shows a little bit the other side, because sometimes the older SERPs that might show you that there is a decay in interest, which means it's not a good thing to even touch, because there's just no need there for anyone. It's most likely this index will be just merged with something else later on. So
I
that's a
see.
little bit like that.
Okay. After covering all the topics, after covering all the topics, what about content writing manually? Working takes years to create content. Can we take Can we use AI tools? So, what's your thoughts on that? Using AI tools to write content.
Yeah, this is another like 30 hours discussion, and this is everyone's dream. I can say that, but in general, if you're playing the real like long-term game where you're trying to be stable, and this is a serious business, I would definitely recommend to do things manually, even though it takes long. Um, AI, you will run into lots of different problems with AI, unfortunately. Also understand that Google is really like not that excited to process and invest into, let's say, evaluating and crawling these AI contents. Uh, they can already request all of these questions through Gemini, through ChatGPT, and etc. And they can collect all of this data that I just presented and store it without having to pay for processing your contents. So it's like they don't really need your, let's say, AI generated articles in that sense. Another just tiny important detail, I was mentioning before that reference to the YouTube video and uh, Liz Raid, the head of search, where she mentioned about experience and perspectives. This is important part because if you try to generate content with AI, you can generate almost anything at semi good quality. Depends how you evaluate quality. It's a different thing, but for now, let's just think it does. But if you want to generate real perspective or real experience, that's very hard to do in an authentic way or in a way that is easy to avoid for AI detection. This is why it's much safer for them to try to prioritize these points because they actually know a person wrote that. Or somebody is really good at faking these things through AI, but that is very, 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 very tough challenge. So, um, yeah, I just want to say in a like most honest advice, I would recommend to do things manually. You can use AI for research, different kind of like hints and even evaluation of your content, but
Mm.
the actual production part, I wouldn't do it, especially on the English language. By the way, if we're going to talk about those countries with other languages and something else, remember, like I mentioned, these semantic evaluations might not even be there, and I think there's lots of proofs for that. So on those SERPs, you can go ham.
Yeah. Just a follow up question on that. I don't know why it's not coming up in the chat, but it has in the app. Mohammed Ayaz asks, I watch your podcast about AI footprints within the content. Can you please let us know about the best practices to catch footprints or any examples of the AI footprints you can share? Thanks.
Thank you so much for this question. I have not yet made a decision for how I would like to share that specific speech. I let's say it's very clear for how they're able to identify it and sort of how to deal with that. The only problem is it's a little bit not maybe something that should be just publicly shared. And so to give you an actual answer, there are different components at play. There is not like a single thing where if you just use these words, you're in trouble, or if you just use this model, you're in trouble, or if you do this kind of like configuration or things like that. Like configure LLM in this way or that way. It's all of these things that come in play all at the same time. And the point from Google's perspective, if you really like trace it down this way, you realize they deeply care about AI content and they went extreme lengths to try to eliminate or catch it at all possible levels, like before it even produced, like miles before that even happens. So if they do give this much effort, that means they genuinely really really care to not get into, let's say, into trouble with these things. So how do you reverse all of that? um, the most obvious things I can recommend is that um, do not use the mainstream models, or like if you go to any kind of LLM like rankings, or leaderboards, get away from the mainstream. From there, try to, obviously don't do a kind of like generation to publication. You need to do more either preparation of what you feed into it before it gives you the articles, or you do a refinement after it gives you the articles. But sort of, let's say, raw dogging it and just publishing straight from LLM, I wouldn't ever recommend you to do that. Just because the amount of statistical patterns that are ingrained into all of these LLMs, you can trace it down to the fundamental problem. The problem is that it's a transformers architecture, and essentially they're all sharing the same training data set because they're all using, at the very least, to some extent, the open, what's it called, Open Graph, or the open source web scraped data corpus, which
Yep.
means exact same data across the board. So once they train, they start to imitate exact same patterns. These same patterns are then identified as AI generated. So an easy solution, I'm not sure really how to like recommend you to do this. It's good to mess with the parameters of the model. It's good to do fine tuning, definitely. As I mentioned, get away from the mainstream, go into more something, let's say, niche or something else. And then the best case is if you do modification or additional layer on top of the actual output. And then the next question comes, well, that actual second layer of processing, do we do it with another AI? Because if you do that, most likely you create second layer of problems instead of fixing the first layer. So even there has to be some kind of human correction or evaluation just to tweak things to make it like practically good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think my biggest issue with AI is if you went in and done an article, like let's say it was a really simple prompt, like write me an article to do with keyword research, and if I done one and if three other people done it, it's probably going to be like maybe not exactly word for word, but it's probably going to be like 70% very very similar. So like what you were saying, you either need to use your own prompts, so I don't know, include semantic triples, make certain that it's entity centric content, stuff like that, or you have someone go through and obviously edit it and add like your business's sales copy, etc. I just don't think that there's like a one prompt that gets it right every time.
yeah, don't even waste time on doing these things. And I can even say that the more you work with these things, the more you realize that AI is not AI. It does not have any intelligence in it. Because you say include these triples, it will include 7 out of those 10. You will ask it to correct 3, it will add those 3, remove the other 2, and it will just okay, it will add all 10, but it will be super bloated with a bunch of useless, okay, well, let's discuss, let's delve into this topic, and it becomes useless and unreadable. It's stuffs in the phrases, but it doesn't actually meaningfully process them.
Mm-hmm.
So even just giving it, let's say, just a queries, like here are the queries, mention all of them in the article. It will not always do that. You do that plus, let's say, just I want a few engrams mentioned, or I want this style of expression. It just collapses. It doesn't do everything. It only can do like 30% kind of, but then it decays. And the point is that you will, considering a few elements that I just mentioned through the presentation, you see there's lots of granular elements that go into the actual proper content. So it's very hard to make it so that it would follow your instructions, preserve different angles and the like answer formats, then also include all of the elements and also make it like readable, not just like comma separated phrases or queries one after another. So the reality is that if you ask any LLM, write me an article, it will write you an article and it will look good. But if you start to give it rules, criteria, format, different, let's say, types of way to express itself, or some, let's say, unique patterns that an author should be following, it's just not even close to be
Mm-hmm.
able to perform that. So it's like an industry's dream, like a daydreaming that this should be possible because it seems so good. The reality is very, very far from that. Um,
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think you either mentioned at like Corey's mastermind, or you might have even mentioned on stage, is every pixel counts. So even having like one bloated word or one bloated sentence or one, I don't know, like just an extra hop in a sentence, that's gonna. And if you again, obviously, if you multiply that by hundreds of pages, that's going to have a negative impact on your website as a whole.
yeah, this is Korai's principle. Every word, every byte, every letter, or every pixel, every byte, every letter.
Yeah.
Because yeah, in the end you can create these contents, but somebody who's doing everything properly manually, they can outrank you, and they have real legitimate like reasons to do that.
Mm.
um, so yeah.
Last two questions, and we'll let you go. Um, how do you establish contextual connection from homepage to nodes? Since most companies put branding and business things on the homepage.
This depends slightly on the type of project. I was mentioning project a homepage for a case where you have this, let's say, YouTube downloader software, and I assume you'll have like an EMD or a partial match there, which is why it makes sense for you to give like the highest page rank page, the highest relevance for that term instead of putting it somewhere else. Uh, that's the reason for that. But the same thing can be applied, for example, for like a local lawyer in a location. So the way these connections are done is really it's coming back to this concept of triples, or how objects are um, communicate, or how they are like interrelated with each other. Um, Based on that, if you follow it, you can connect the pages to each other. You can also connect sections to each other. That's like the glue of how everything works within the like semantic web. So um, that's the main fundamental principle. You can even actually apply it across different websites. You can create a website for one like key topic, and the supplementary topic can be processed through a different website, but they will be always essentially referencing. So for that piece of information is addressed on this part, and the reverse is addressed here. So um, it's more like understand the object does something to another object, or object has technically is also an action, another object. So that's the connection.
Yeah, that makes sense. Then our last and final question, and did you know what? I was actually going to ask you this. Pavel, do you daily read about old and newly launched patents, only Google or others too? And how do you choose ones to read amongst the hundreds of millions of thousands of patents?
Yes, every day, every night I don't sleep. I just read. Um, well, um, to be honest with you, recently I don't study patterns that much. When it comes to patterns, I read everything that Corey has shared, and this is a shortcut and a cheat code because he has filtered thousands of them, and he just shared the most valuable ones. So if you're reading them, you're actually reading like gold. This is literally like purely the most unique ones that have really something that you can learn from them. The point is, if you read patents from Google, they can have like 40 patents that basically say exact same thing, and it's very mentally not good for your mental health to go through that. Which is why, if you want to do that, go through Korai's YouTube channel, go all the way to the oldest videos, and there he starts to explain what he calls a pre-training, and then he starts to slowly share some of the patents. All of those are really good to read. All of those are unique, and they'll show you like it's like a very beautiful unfolding of everything that's going on and how they think about different things. When it comes to, let's say, me personally, I mostly read research papers because that's where we see newest things. That's what I genuinely care about, and I, to be very honest, kind of read it as a hobby because there's also a lot of other like cool tech innovation happening there. Like for example, we see that Google um, I don't remember now if it was Google or not, but there's lots of things related. Not Google. There was one paper recently came out related to like quantum computing and different quantum tasks, and basically scientists have proven that um, it was previously a strong belief that our current computers are not able to do certain tasks very quickly. We have to have quantum computing to do those tasks that would take like billions of years within a few minutes. But it was just proven that if you, let's say, reconfigure or adjust our current computers, they can do those tasks equally as fast or in like an adequately fast amount of time. So we don't have to have that type of quantum computing, and only quantum computing can solve certain tasks. That is just not true. All the time humanity believed this is true. Now scientists have proven it is not. There's also other things. Of course, the mostly things I care about are related to, let's say, text processing, text understanding, retrieval, or like ranking systems, because this is purely, it's going to go into Google's algorithms. And there are like really, let's say, breakthroughs and innovations happening there as well. The coolest part of all of this is that it just shows you that humanity is like evolving, or we're accomplishing new things like week by week or month by month, and something that we believed is not possible is becoming possible. It's much
Yeah.
more interesting than reading news, to be honest. And for me, it's like everywhere else there is a bunch of like fake crap and misinformation and like hate, anger, and all of this stuff, which is very like frustrating, and I really don't want to like deal with that. Once you go through study the actual papers, you genuinely see the reality. Like it's like a breath of fresh air, because these things are real. You just see that they tried to solve something, but they failed. Like it didn't work, and they'll actually explain all of that, but also explain why it didn't work. So once you're like, let's say, getting the real information that is in our reality, it's very like calming, or it's like a meditation almost. So I guess it's a good hobby to combine with the actual useful research.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah, I try to read. I just try to dedicate some time per like at least once per 2 months to kind of see what has happened, or maybe there's something that I missed or stuff like that.
Yeah. How many patents do you think you've read?
Not that many. I didn't count, but I think it would be only around 200 or 300.
That's probably 199 more than me.
Well, Corey has read like 5,000 or 4,000, and
Yeah, that
I think like Bill Slavsky has read maybe like 20,000 or 15,000 or something like that. So um, I don't even compare, or that's why I don't even want to count, because it's like a grain of sand in the desert. That it's really like that.
yeah, perfect. Um, for everyone that's still watching, remember to subscribe to Pavel. I believe you're starting to grow out your personal brand. You're doing a lot more talks as well. I almost see you as the easier version of Corey to understand.
I
So
don't know
yeah,
if it's good or bad.
I think that's a good thing.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I definitely want to help people to try to understand things a little bit more in depth. But also, as I mentioned, there is lots of very cool new stuff and just interesting stuff. And I'll be sharing that as well. As I mentioned, that was the goal, to actually share those things, but I haven't even gotten to that part yet. But it will be coming at some point.
all right, perfect. Right, so thank you everyone for asking questions. Thank you, Pavel, for joining us today. We actually went well over the 1 hour mark. We're at like 1 hour 40. But yeah, thanks so much for everyone that joined.
Thank you so much for inviting also.
Cheers.